Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Please welcome to the stage Mr. Charlie Williams.
Well, good afternoon. You guys all came back. Thank you very much. Glad to have you back. This is an exciting afternoon for me because I get to listen to and hear from one of my favorite generals in the United States Air Force. And so I'm just excited. Let me remind you, don't forget, if you have questions, make sure you get them in the app. And I'm sure you have a lot of questions for him. And we'll sit and have a little conversation when he finishes his remarks. But how was lunch? Everybody okay? Nobody's going to fall asleep, right? You can't fall asleep during this presentation. Too much to hear. So, somewhere in 1999, I met this young kid, this bright-eyed, kid, looks like thinking he was going somewhere in the United States Air Force. And at the time, we were in the Pentagon's Secretary of the Air Force's office, and I'm working sort of as a team lead doing some program stuff, and enters this young captain, all inspired and charged up as he comes through the Air Force intern program. And you know how sometimes you meet someone and you just know there's something special about them? Well, this guy, there was something special about. I wasn't sure what it was, and I wasn't sure that it meant anything other than the fact there's something about this kid. Well, it turns out that this very same kid that I met in 1999, and I watched through his career in the United States Air Force, ended up in some really, really awesome jobs, and ultimately came to lead, become the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Contracting for Air Force in the Department of the Air Force. But prior to getting to that role, he had some really interesting jobs, and one of those was he led the contracting organization at the Air Armament Center. And for those of you that don't know the Air Armament Center, they buy stuff that goes boom, big stuff that goes boom. And he was engaged in that business. And I'm not going to tell you everything that he's done because there's just too much, but he also went to lead the Air Force Installation Contracting Command, which was a new organization. And in that job, he did a significant set of work to bring enterprise perspective to the services and installation services throughout the United States Air Force, making a significant difference in savings and spend across the United States Air Force. He and I once again crossed paths when I was the director of the Defense Contract Management Agency, and he became the commander in Afghanistan for the Defense Contract Management Agency. And he spent a year in the desert, commanding civilians and military members from all services in a really, really important time as U.S. forces were trying to conduct their mission in Afghanistan, Iraq, and that whole theater of operation. And I got to tell you, General Holt came in, not at the time as a general, but came in to that organization and brought significant fire and inspiration to a set of folks that had been doing this business for a long time. And it just made a whole difference in how we got that mission done. And so that same individual ended up in the job as the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Contracting in the United States Air Force. That's a job I used to hold, and I remind him all the time that I hope he was able to fix some of the things that I broke, and I'm sure he has. And I'm sure that when he comes out and talks to you, you'll understand the kind of person he is and what he brings to the table. Now, I think I told you guys that one of the reasons that we asked General Holt to come and talk to you is not just because we wanted him to talk to you about the tactical business of contracting and pricing. He can do that all day long. He can do that in sleep. But what I really want him to help you understand is to paint the picture of why we need you to do what you do. Why the country needs industry and government to work together to make a difference for the warfighter and for the country. And I think he'll do that very well. So after this next video, I'll introduce to you Major General Cameron Holt.
From the Wright Flyer to the F-35. The Air Force has had many buildups and drawdowns. One exciting period of time for the Air Force was in the 1950s. The Air Force's Sentry Series fighters were developed in rapid succession, quickly testing and proving new technologies such as supersonic flight and incorporating nuclear weapons onto the aircraft. In just 6 years, from 1953 to 1959, the Air Force produced more than 2,000 F-100s, a quantity totally unheard of today in such a short time span. As time went on, aircraft advancements and new platforms became fewer and further between. Unseen, but also present in the fleet, are aircraft that are being maintained and flown well past their prime. Our current acquisition system churns out new platforms slowly. Consequently, the U.S. industrial base is smaller and works to keep old planes alive, rather than design cutting-edge future systems and platforms. If we are successful at changing our acquisition system, we will see a much more crowded landscape in tomorrow's Air Force.
Thank you, Charlie, for the gracious introduction. We're almost through fixing the stuff you screwed up, but we got a few more things to go. I do want to tell you it's a great honor to be here with you again this year. Thank God we're in person. That's wonderful all by itself. And I'm going to take you on a little bit of a chat. I am disappointed. I was told there was going to be smoke and pyrotechnics and an elevator that would bring me up through the middle of the floor, but I don't know. We'll just have to make do. I am going to bend your brain a little bit, and I might even get a little controversial on you, just depending upon where you sit, from where you stand. But you know, if I didn't, this wouldn't be a pricing conference, right? So. I do love contracting and pricing. I've done it my whole adult life. I do understand really deeply because of the opportunities the Air Force has given me to not just think about this in terms of every seat you can sit in contracting or pricing, but they've also afforded me an opportunity to be a program manager and also to be a requirements officer. And if you please just keep this between us, even a budget officer. Shh. Don't tell anybody. I don't want to go back to the bad man. And they also, even though I went to the University of Georgia for my undergrad, they processed some waivers on me and they sent me to Harvard. And at Harvard, they made sure I could spell it. But at Harvard, they actually gave me an opportunity to study national security above the military instrument of national power. So thinking through economics and information and diplomacy and how that fits together with the military instrument of national power in geopolitics. And so everything from deploying after 9/11 and running around with cash on back, boots on ground in the middle of a godforsaken country with fighting going on, to the boardroom of working F-22 and negotiating F-22 or defending its capabilities to Congress, and then leading in Afghanistan for Charlie, who was the director of DCMA. And I'll just tell you, I've told the group before that I had lunch with, anything you don't like that I am, you have Charlie to blame, because I am the weed that never got pulled. And he had ample opportunities to do it, but he just never did. So it's his fault what happens now, not mine. What I do want to do, though, is I want to take you on a little bit of a tour, because I want you to understand, let's pick your minds up for a second on the threat that we face as a nation. You hear a lot about it in the press these days, and frankly, I don't think you hear about it enough. And I don't think that there's a day goes by or a group that I talk to where I don't refer to it in some way. And the reason is because I believe that part of our job as senior leaders is to be candid with the American public and to be candid with our industry partners about the challenges that we face. Of course, I can't talk about classified information, but there is a lot of things that we need to talk about that are not classified to help you understand the serious nature of the threat and why we should all have a sense of urgency about it. So you see the great power competition. You watch CNN or whatever news outlet, and you see these 15-second spots that come and go. Oh, Italy is the latest country to join with President Xi in front of a bunch of cameras, and they shook hands, and their flags are behind them. And Italy is now becoming a part of Belt and Road, the 150th nation in the world to be a part of Belt and Road under Chinese leadership in the world. And you think, okay, that's nice. And they move to the commercial, and then you see a story about, oh, there's, oh, that's interesting. In Freeport, Bahamas, there's a $3 billion deep water port going in there. I wonder what they need a deep water port for in Freeport, Bahamas. That's interesting. And then another couple of commercials later, you find out that Bolivia has asked the United States and the United Kingdom to restructure their debt that China holds. And we frankly don't have the money to extend the same kind of debt to that country. You see these things happening. You see China say that they're respecting the sovereignty of other nations and they're just interested in economic competition. And in the same segment, you see that they took the Spratly Islands or the Scarborough Reef that belongs to another nation under the international law of the sea, and they put military capabilities on it. And then they advised all nations that if you overfly that, you're now overflying Chinese territory, and the international law of the sea applies, where the 12 miles territorial limits, the 100-mile economic exclusive zone, and all the rest of it. You see these things go by. You see stories go by about the National Basketball Association tweeting out support for solidarity with the people of Hong Kong in their struggle for freedom, and the Chinese Communist Party expressing concern over their economic relationship with the NBA. And the very next day, the NBA tweeting out an apology and a retraction based upon how many economic interests that they have inside China. You see Hollywood rewriting scripts to make sure that they've tested it to make sure the Chinese Communist Party would not be offended by it. You see all these things happening, but nobody ever pulls it together for you. There's no story out there that you can see what's going on. Well, I'm going to do a little bit of that. I got to be careful about going too far with it. But you're going to hear some of my opinions, and I'm going to be as candid as I know how to be. I'm not here to freak you out, but at the same time, I would tell you that one of the biggest problems I see is that we don't really recognize what's going on. And part of it is because of our own paradigms. We'll see if I can help you. In fact, I don't need to be the only one to help you. China's helping you too, because some of their military, they go to military academies just like we do. And in one case, there was a couple of Army PLA colonels back in 1999, if that gives you a little bit of perspective on how long they've been really focused on us. I would tell you that it's around 25 years before that they actually undertook what I would term loosely as war against the United States and the international system that we set up after World War II. I would put that in the late 1970s somewhere. You could argue with me if you wanted to. But that's where I think this thought was going, and they've been very gracious to write it all down for us. And so I would commend this book to you. One of these colonels, I think, is a 2-star general now. I don't know what happened to the other one. I don't know if they just said the wrong thing or whatever happened. But when they talk about unrestricted warfare, they're talking about using all the instruments of national power as one. So military, diplomacy, information, and economics, and blending all them together into one. They have observed the American system. They've observed it well. They're experts in it. They understand where our deep fractures are, and they know exactly how to work that. They know that, for example, the way that we think about warfare, the way that we think about foreign policy even, and I would say increasingly since World War II to today, in World War II, we were pretty adept at using all 4 instruments of national power, is what I would tell you. Since that time, for whatever reason, we've become almost apologetic about our economic or information power. And when I say information power, I'm not saying manipulating the truth. I'm just saying telling the truth unapologetically and not withholding the truth. And so we look at things in terms of foreign policy in a very militaristic way, I would say. And when we are in using foreign policy, when we were in Afghanistan and Iraq, we had soldiers that were wearing body armor with a rifle slung over their shoulder and a helmet on, talking to community leaders saying, "I'm here to build a school." Now, I wonder if they doubted our intentions when you have somebody wearing body armor saying, "I'm here to build a school." And so we have a blind spot, I would say. And as China is thinking about this, that book details how do you take down a really large, powerful Western democracy like the United States. And it details how you could lead, instead of with military on military force or competition, use the qi against the chang, the yin against the yang. And as they think about this using economic and information manipulation and coercion, instead of force on force, there is a military element of their strategy for sure. They have a larger navy than we do, and they're making great strides in their military capabilities to keep us out of the Pacific region. But that is not the tools they're leading with, and I would argue it's actually not their definition of victory. I think they believe that if they can keep their activities short of what we would define as war, I think they can actually achieve all their objectives in flipping the international system to a system of loyalty to the Chinese Communist Party. It's a term that they call the communities of common destiny, is what they want to change the international system to. And there's a very methodical way they're going about doing it, and I would tell you it's extraordinarily effective. And in many cases, because they have a consumer market with growing spending power of 1.5 billion people, other nations and businesses around the world have had to give great pause to the question of, should I align myself with the United States or should I align myself with China in the future? Could it be possible that in a day from some time from now, that we lose Taiwan in a signing ceremony and our own leaders explain to us why that's a good deal? Or if you could imagine, years into the future maybe, reunification of the Korean Peninsula, something we've dreamed of seeing since we left there in the 1950s, and we've had, tens of thousands of troops on the peninsula ever since. But what if they reunified under Chinese sponsorship instead of United States sponsorship? What would that look like? And so we should think about what kind of tools are they using? And is that defined as war or not? I would argue we need to pay attention. So here's Holt's hypothesis. I don't know if you can throw the slide back up there. I'm not saying this is the opinion of DOD or even the Air Force, but here's Holt's hypothesis. I think that military deterrence and great power competition is all about competitive acquisition systems. Which one is faster? Which one is cheaper? Which one can achieve overmatch the soonest? Because even in those instruments of national power, even though they're not leading with military power, I believe that military power is still important to underwrite the other instruments of national power, and I do think there is a deterrent value to it. I'll say something very arrogant here. Maybe in a Navy town, they're going to be upset with me, I know. That's okay. But I would argue that freedom of maneuver and strategic overmatch in the domains of airspace and cyberspace, and I would add undersea to that, I believe those have the highest deterrent value against war with China than any other of the joint force capabilities. I'm not suggesting that we don't need other capabilities to win a war, so don't misunderstand, but in terms of deterrence, I think it really bothers them, the idea that we could operate with impunity without their knowledge or permission inside their borders in those domains. And I think the lack of understanding that they may have about what we are really capable of doing, I think that provides tremendous deterrent value against war. And so what you all are engaged in, matters. And I'm going to I will connect the dots for you. But I think if that deterrent picture looked really good, we would prevent their activities that would stem into active 20th century warfare, where you're talking about kinetic, territorial gain type warfare. That's the warfare we think is the only kind of warfare. I would tell you that that's not true in the 21st century. It would only blunt and influence, however, their activities economically and information-wise in the world. And that's unfortunate, but the military instrument of power alone cannot prevent activities in those domains entirely. But I do think that if we do things right and we start to understand the urgency associated with it, we can influence it in a positive direction. So the key question is, they believe that our system is in decline and that this idea of unalienable rights that is now 246 years old against the 10,000-year history of China, they believe that that's quite a temporary idea and that the rights of the collective and the rights of the government are more important to protect than the rights of the individual. And when the Declaration was read for the first time at the State House in Boston to a small crowd gathered below, I would argue it was the first time in the world where a system of government was established with the idea that there are something called pre-government rights, that every person is created with these unalienable rights that no government has the right to give or to take away, and that the responsibility of governments is to protect those rights. I think that's what the flag is in this capture the flag game. And so I think it's important for us to understand that that does not necessarily mean that territorial gains or losses are in play. And we can actually lose those unalienable rights without any kind of property being lost. And I think that's we're not ahead in that regard. So, owning the high ground. Now that I've depressed you thoroughly, so what do we see as the obstacles to us really understanding this 21st century war and getting after it? The very first one that I'm not going to talk to you about today, but in me talking to you at all, I think I'm addressing, is we've got to talk about it. We've got to understand, and we've got to perceive and communicate what that threat actually looks like. And people have to wrap their minds around the idea that it is an existential threat to our way of life, to the freedoms that our kids may or may not enjoy. This is not a sitcom where at the end, after the last commercial, all of the situations resolve themselves and the good guys win. If you look back in history, it is possible that you could have another Dark Ages. And so there is a lot at stake for the international system and for the world and for our children. And so while I would tell you that we are not perfect as a nation, I would tell you that we are the greatest ideal to live up to that has ever been created in the world. And of course, as I'm sitting here with my nation's uniform on, you can tell that I think it's an idea that's worth giving up your life for. And so I think we ought to be paying attention. The motto of our nation is not e pluribus pluribus. The motto of our nation is e pluribus unum. And I believe it is time for us to come together as Americans, industry and government, capital markets, innovators in the commercial marketplace, innovators in the defense marketplace. I think it's time to lock the voices out of division and start to understand who we really are as Americans, and that that's not something to apologize for. That's something to celebrate. And the things that bind us are so much more powerful than the things that separate us. And the time for doing that is now. And I would tell you that the United States military, in this kind of a 21st century war, are not necessarily on the front lines of this fight. When I've gone to talk to Wall Street or other places in our capital markets and other places, I've told them that it may look like I'm on the front lines, but it's you who are more on the front lines of this fight than anyone, given the weapons and the tools that they're using, which are economic and information most principally. I will talk about those other two, slow, micromanaged Cold War resource system. That is, I think, the number one obstacle to us competing and winning in this fight, and to developing a very strong military deterrent and strategic overmatch that influences the other instruments of national power. Number three, the perverse incentives. I believe that over time, you saw the video, over time, and it's not because of a greed thing or any of those kind of issues. It just, in our free capital market system, as the defense industry has become smaller and smaller relative to the full industrial weight of America, which is certainly not a bad thing, but as it has become smaller and smaller, and as the barriers to entry have become higher and higher and higher, we have gotten to a place where the business model and the incentives for business have gotten us off track with the imperatives of what this 21st century war demands of us. And we have to find a way to really think through that and align our profit motivations, our free capital market motivations with the national defense strategy and what it's going to take to actually blow their doors off, and in a way that demoralizes and influences their behavior. Okay, so the first one, there's an article that was written by Bill Greenwald and Dan Patt called Competing in Time. And when I read it, I called Bill Greenwald, Great American, and I was so excited because this, in a very concise way, I think is the best analysis I have seen that compares the Chinese system to the United States system in resourcing of national security, and points out that there are fatal flaws in that, in the thought process that we would use a 1961 process conceived by Robert McNamara that we still take today as a going-in assumption. We don't even question it anymore. Congress doesn't question it anymore. The DOD doesn't question it anymore. It just is. And it is time to question it. China can move money inside 20 minutes inside of our own markets. They can buy up tens or dozens of small, innovative startups with technologies of their choosing, make sure that the founder is rich for the rest of their lives, take that IP and give it to Chinese companies and lock DOD out of it. In some cases, even some of our large tech data firms are making announcements that it's unethical to do business with the DOD, but yet they have no problem at all doing business with China and actually supporting their ability to do things like facial recognition software and algorithms that can see all your website activity and all your financial transactions. China, I would argue, already has the ability to coerce nations and businesses. And I believe it is not too far off from the time when they can actually rate the loyalty of individuals, not just within their own borders, but potentially worldwide, and sanction individuals in really interesting ways. And frankly, a lot of that rise is coming from the United States. And so we really need to be thinking through what that means. So we also have gotten a very centrally and micromanaged system of appropriations that have served the Cold War well. In this environment today, though, it is absolutely going to kill us. We cannot have a system where the appropriations, where it's in statute, that the name of the program is on that money, and the phase within the program is on the statute. So it's illegal for a program executive officer inside of execution year to look at that and say, no, there's a better way to allocate those resources. And as fast as technology is moving, when this PPBS process demands that we should know 4 years in advance what kind of technologies and what colors of money we want to put the budget request in for, and then in execution year, our ability to make decisions that are smart, either way, is limited and requires the prior approval of Congress, using archaic, very, very cumbersome processes we call an above-threshold reprogramming action or an omnibus reprogramming bill. Enormous amounts of activity that take a long time and get political. So if the legislative branch doesn't like what the executive branch is doing, they'll say, well, I'm not approving your ATRs. Okay, what connection is there to that? We've got to start thinking differently about that. I know the appropriators are concerned about that because it gives them the ability to help their constituents. If their constituents are concerned that they have a certain amount of money for that company in the budget, if a PEO decides to move that money while there's negotiations are going on, you better believe that congressman is going to get a call. Can we as a nation start to understand, though, how important it is, or we're going to lose if we don't think of more modern ways to do the oversight? I swore allegiance to the Constitution. I believe congressional oversight is necessary, but we've got to modernize it. Instead of an oversight process that happens once per year, maybe there's insight we can give them quarterly, but we don't stop decisions that need to be made on the fly. But we are transparent about it. Those perverse incentives, the goal is to spend all the money as fast as possible, yet within those narrowly defined constraints issued by Congress. The business model post-consolidation of the defense industry, it incentivizes a small number of very large primes to, in some cases, lose money to lock up that development or production business. You may see it in the form of a $300 million CapEx expenditure where they bought a big hypersonics facility, not with government money, but with private money. You may see it in unreasonably low proposals on different RFPs for the next generation of fighter or the next generation of cargo aircraft or whatever it is. And as they do that, to try to make themselves more attractive to lock up that business, then just because of its business, you can't just lose money when the dollars are most valuable today. If you do that, you have to be assured that you're going to make 10 or 20 times that back later when the dollars are actually worth less because of inflation. And of course, that is being really pronounced right now. So it misaligns industry's incentives with our own. When you get down to how am I going to make that money back? Well, the obvious answer is we've got to lock up that business and get to vendor lock in some way, shape, or form. And then the other problem that is really kind of a perverse incentive, if the Air Force goes to Capitol Hill and says, I need to divest that weapon system, but it's in the place in the life cycle that is the most valuable to the company, and they're getting their money back off of what they lost, there's going to be an objection to that. When we got to get rid of irrelevant technology. We're spending money to do service life extension programs on airplanes that really need to be in a museum somewhere just to keep them airworthy, let alone relevant to the fight. And I could go through a list of them like all day long. B-1, B-2, B-52, U-2, KC-10, KC-135, F-16, F-15. We have F-15s that are coming apart in the air, so we had to build the F-15EX because we can't afford more fifth-gen fighters. And how long has the B-52 been around? I mean, yes, it's still relevant, but at what cost? My goodness. And so what would happen if we flipped the business model so that industry could still remain profitable, in fact, profitable sooner, and recycle that money into the next generation to where our private sector profit motive incentive and the national defense strategy incentive of just outpacing what China can keep up with. That's the sweet spot. So moving on, the goal becomes keep old weapon systems around as long as possible. Not a good thing. This is a busy chart. It's just for your perusal if you ever care to get the slides. But I will tell you, on the bottom right-hand corner there, you're going to see 3 lines. So the dark blue line that jumps way up in time and dollars is military aircraft. And then the commercial aircraft market is that light blue line that has gone up slightly in time to market. And then that yellow line is the automotive industry in time to market. So I'm using the automotive industry here, but there are any number of commercial technologies out there, phones and other things, where intellectual property and vendor lock is no longer the most important thing in sustained profitability over time. In the defense industry, it's still all about vendor lock to keep sustained profitability over time. We have got to get to the place where defense can make that jump from IP still being important, because you don't want to share trade secrets with your neighbor, but let's face it, guys, when we fielded an important technology, China's got the IP. You're just protecting it from other Americans. Now, I get that why you do that. But if we could incentivize, if we could work together and use our pricing knowledge, use our knowledge of balance sheets and cash flow statements and income statements and 8Ks and 10Ks and how Wall Street works and how institutional investment works in this nation, I believe we can make the jump to where the single biggest motivator of profitability in the defense market could jump to speed to market. And if you are a company that can do that repeatedly, you will make a ton of money. Stupid Apple profit, I'm talking. Okay? That's the conversation. You can't have a conversation about intellectual property unless you have a conversation about the business model. Some of my neighbors in the Pentagon don't understand that. But that's the conversation that needs to happen. So what are we doing about it in contracting in the Air Force? I won't advertise this long, but we've been doing over the last 4 years something I call mission-focused business leadership, which I would say is juxtaposed from where we were, which I'm not disparaging, which I would say is compliance-focused business advice. This is a more proactive role that requires us as contracting and pricing to understand national security and the end state of what we do. Connect the dots between what we do, finding solutions in business with our industry partners, against the why. That's the secret sauce, because there's no one outside of this crowd that knows the details of how to turn dollars into fly, fight, win. I'm telling you, if you guys don't lead industry and government, no one else can, period. Not any other member of the acquisition team, and I can say that because I am one, right? They understand DoD 5000 well, but you'd be shocked to learn that not many people know what you know about how the FAR works, how pricing works, but not in the way to just say we're compliant and then check that box, but in a way to say that's the Cold War system we have. It's not going to change soon. How do we hack that system? How do we use our knowledge to hack that system and to innovate against it and find ways through it? All those constraints, still legal, still regulatory correct, but we understand the mission and we know where we're going to go together. And we try new things and we stop worrying about the recrimination culture. The recrimination culture will be there. You can set your watch by it. It will come. And frankly, it's okay. That's part of our nation. That's the way it works. But if we can answer the question on what we did and what we tried, even if we lost a GIO protest, God forbid, or we got a bad audit report, oh my gosh, what happens then? Or we got an embarrassing article because something we made a mistake on didn't go so well, and there's an article about it. I'm telling you, nobody died in that transaction. It's okay. Just answer the recrimination culture. Just go and answer it. If we can answer that we were trying to make gains against our mission and the threat, then you should stand up and take whatever recrimination that they have for you, even if it means you have to lose your job in doing it. And that's how serious I think this threat to our nation is. We've got to stop paying attention to our own career progression and start worrying about the freedom of our kids. Back in the 1930s, that's what people were doing. Billy Mitchell, Hap Arnold, Claire Chennault, I could go on and on with the list of people that were spit out by their organizations. Absolutely spit out. And yet, they did what they did with conviction and motivation and professional courage because they knew what threat was coming. That's where we got to get to. So this is kind of in plain English what we're doing. We're inciting violence. And so this is the flight plan. It's actually kind of cool. It's based on something that Google did called Objectives and Key Results. John Doerr wrote a book about it called Measure What Matters. It's really, really pretty cool. It sounds like it's really simple, but it's fantastic. And we've got teams of teams operating simultaneous to each other across 4 lines of effort. And there's teams of teams are breaking down every stovepipe of command in the Air Force and Space Force, and they're teaming up against these key results, completely autonomous, but also completely transparent with each other. So when one key result team changes their key result, an email goes to every interdependent key result team, and then they review those. You can actually respond to opportunities and threats in a minute. It's probably happening right now as I speak to you. No command and control necessary. It's self-organizing. It's a beautiful thing. These are the lines of effort. The 1, 2, and 4, I would tell you, are internal to us in contracting in the Air Force. Those are things that are necessary for us to change about our role, our training, what we get paid, how we think about our role versus contracting versus business leadership. What does that mean? Now we've got a course with UNC Keenan Flagler School where we send all our unlimited warrant holders through it to teach them balance sheets and cash flow statements and income statements. And how do we align an award fee plan with a proxy statement? How do we read an 8K or a 10K? And how do we put that to work in a contract environment to align incentives and challenge our thinking? Well, if you use a cost plus contract up front in development, because that's what the book said, that's what DAU taught me. But if Apple or somebody else is doing development of a product, do they expect 3% return on that development investment? I don't think so. And that's the talent you're competing against in the private sector. We got to start thinking differently about business. And the only way to do that is to understand business and contracting and pricing and then start putting that together. And we're doing that in the Air Force, and we have some successes in that, and it is phenomenal. But imagine that. You talk about acquisition heresy or pricing heresy. We are committing it every day. But the results are great. All right, so I'm going to focus the rest of the conversation, though, on owning the high ground because it gets back to optimizing that acquisition enterprise. I want to pit my 8,000 kids in Air Force and Space Force contracting against China's however many kids they have, probably 75,000, and see who wins. I want to know what my counterpart looks like. I asked the intel community, please give me more information. I think my kids are better. We're going to do this. They haven't come up with that yet. They're not used to getting asked questions by contracting folks. But let's get into that. Okay, so there's really 2 kinds of innovation that we're working towards. One is what I call inside-the-box innovation, and the other is outside-the-box innovation. It's amazing what we can get done without changing one jot or tittle in the FAR or anywhere else. And if you're giving people the right and the authority to go hack that system, and you say, I've got your back, go, I have got your back, it's amazing what our people can actually come up with because they know so much about it. But you've got to take away that recrimination culture risk from them. And you've got to have their back. We can lower the barriers to entry into the defense marketplace that has become so small, and in some cases very slow and very mirrored to its government counterpart. For good reasons, I'm not criticizing, but we've got to expose it to the full weight of speed and innovation in the U.S. marketplace. Lower bureaucracy, you're seeing a picture there of what we did in year 1 called Operation Clean Sweep, where we literally just hacked down and deleted every mandatory procedure in Air Force contracting below my level. Hundreds and hundreds of pages gone. And that was just a start. We got rid of the PGIs this past year. And in its place, we came up with something called tactics, techniques, and procedures, where literally a 2-striper, just having found a better way to do something on blanket purchase agreements, can walk to his computer, and did, this is a real example, and put a tactic, technique, or procedure in on a better way to do blanket purchase agreements. 15 minutes later, in Japan, half a world away, somebody chimed in and says, oh, thank you, I needed that. It was perfect timing for us. Imagine what happened. AQC didn't approve it. It didn't get legally reviewed. Oh my gosh. And it's like cats and dogs living together. We became, from a regulatory top-down organization to a learning organization, bottom up. Judgment is required, but guess what? You've got the authority. If you decide legal review is necessary, do it. If you don't, okay, don't. If something blows up in your face and it was for good reasons and a mistake, I got your back. If you're doing it for unethical reasons to make yourself rich or important or famous, you're on your own, dude. That's not what we're about. Contractual incentives I already talked about, aligning them in new ways. We're getting some good gains there. Greater transparency and collaboration. Boy, that's what this conference is all about. I mean, it really should be. And we've got to drop the knives. And we've got to stop assuming that your counterpart, the minute they say intellectual property or whatever comes out of my mouth, if you tense up, I would ask you, chill out, open your mind up, and help me think. If you don't like the way that I've come up with this, help me think of a different way. But listen to the end result, because it's got to be there for national security reasons. Proposing outside the box innovation. See, we are not staying in our lane in Air Force contracting, I'm here to tell you. We're giving advice to requirements folks. We're giving advice to anybody who'll listen, our own leadership. We're talking to Congress. We're talking to the media. We'll talk to anybody. And we've got to come up with ideas. It's not my job to decide on those things, right? We have a constitution, and those people get to decide things. But as business leaders for our missions, we're going to keep pushing. And we're going to keep putting ideas on the table. And so what are some of those ideas? What about shifting and increasing the profitability of the defense industry, but shifting it from late stage SLEPs and upgrades and sustainment in year 50 to thinking new about how much profit could you possibly earn in development and production, and then a competitive marketplace, and then go back to development and production. When the dollars are most valuable, I think that we could change behavior overnight. The problem is the defense industry, by and large, not everybody, is doing so well financially, they can't jump off of that lily pad with me. So I got to find ways to work with you guys and get your ideas, but also do it coercively if we need to, so that everybody's on the same playing field and your neighbor in your competition is no better or worse off than you are in this new model. But it will be difficult for people to accept. Flipping the business model from vendor lock to speed to market. Changing government incentives, borrowing a concept that publicly traded corporations have been using for years, free cash flow. To incentivize free cash flow to increase the value of the whole firm. What if we did that on the government side? What could that do? I think it could do a lot. Shift from capabilities-based system, which is very linear in its nature, to a threat-based system where we're constantly staring at the threat and interested in which technologies and capabilities do we need to stay at parity with them, and which technologies do we need to achieve overmatch in and absolutely demoralize them. So, a couple of examples. I didn't want to just give you theory. So since 2015, we've been doing category management. Charlie referred to this, that we started when I was back at AFICC. And it was one of the very few grassroots change efforts that has ever been successful that I've tried. In a large bureaucracy, there is nothing so hard as doing grassroots change. And I've chased a lot of windmills down. And a few of them have fallen, which is like a drug. It keeps you coming back for more. And this is one of them that has fallen. And actually, this is an outdated chart. This is where we were at the end of fiscal year 21. I think we're up to $2.8 billion saved since 2015 in category management. This idea started with 3 people that had no titles or authority or power in an office thinking about a private sector supply chain best practice and adapting it for a government rule set. I should tell you this is not the same thing that the federal version of it is, the category management at the federal level. You're not going to see spend under management there. You're not going to see any of that garbage. That's not what this is. This is about evaluating requirements and thinking about new ways to get to requirements and doing demand shaping, rate, and process savings. This is not about just building bigger contracts, but it has been really, really valuable. Another success story. People accuse us of innovation theater. We use SBIR's money, Small Business Innovation Research money. We get about $700 to $1 billion a year of that money. And some people say, well, that's great, it's flashy, it's AFWorks, it's fun, it's marketing. But the Air Force really isn't serious. They're just trying to show that they can be like innovators, but they're really not doing anything. Well, I would tell you that the reason why we're using SBIRs, which I would agree with you is too little money to be facing down Chinese control of some of these technologies and competing in that space with them, it is far too little money. If I were king for a day, I would have, when we did away with the other contingency operations account, I would have in its place immediately stood up a Defense Production Act Title III account. And we would have started and gotten after this in a big, big way. However, we didn't do that. SBIR's money is RDT&E funds, and it's about the only money that we have in the large budgets that you see that doesn't have the name of the program on it, the phase of the program, and it's micromanaged all the way from Capitol Hill. And so that's why we're using this to get as much as we can get done in innovation. And so how are we doing it? Well, it's not enough money on its own to do anything. So we can show you that we can award hundreds of contracts in a week, which we can. We have rapid X cells all across the nation of contracting ninjas that come together in these sprints from every command in the world, and they go awards like hundreds of contracts. But it is incredible what we've been able to do by partnering with venture capital. So when we understand how capital markets work and how venture capitalists think about their risk profiles, where generally speaking, 1 out of every 10 is going to be a big winner, and 9 out of every 10 is going to lose money. But if they've listened to 1,000 pitch decks in a year, and they only picked 3, but every one of those thousands typically are pre-revenue companies. There is no revenue. It's just PowerPoint deep. It's an idea. But they get a lot of equity position coming early in the early stages, and that's what makes them money. But what if the Air Force awards contracts to those technology areas that we believe have merit, and we're bringing a whole marketplace with us? Ooh, now, for the venture capitalists, that's like, these are not pre-revenue companies anymore, and I'm still the first one getting in on the equity because the Air Force is non-dilutive. We just awarded a contract. We didn't take any equity. And so that alignment of interests has created enormous effects. Look at the chart. So the yellow is $1.2 billion worth of funds, and in those technology areas, it turned into $13 billion worth of investment in those companies. That's not bad. So we're still learning. We're still getting better at this and becoming more strategic in what technologies that we do. So I'm not telling you we're perfect. But this is a good start with a very small amount of money, relatively speaking, against China's efforts to lock us out of our own technologies. Flipping the business model. So flipping the business model is something that you'll tense up over. Because it does require that we use the word intellectual property, which has become a religion for most folks. I was once speaking at a conference with a bunch of general counsels from the defense industry. My lawyer buddy invited me to speak, And I said, okay, now, ladies and gentlemen, I want to talk about intellectual property. And then I paused for a second. And then I said, okay, I want you all to be honest. How many of you tensed up when I said intellectual property? And they started laughing out loud, and every single hand in the room raised. Because their entire job is about protecting the intellectual property, right? They can't think of any other future than that. That's the only means to sustain profitability and competitive advantage. Or is it? Or is it? And that's what I want to question. It's not that the government needs unlimited rights to everything. We don't. Increasingly, we're actually thinking through what do we need and what do we not need. And things that are advances in how we do digital engineering and digital twinning are actually unlocking some capabilities where if we do open systems architecture, do we really care about the intellectual property in that component anymore? Maybe not. If we know the interface, and that's government owned, but the size, weight, mass, power, center of gravity properties of whatever's in that black box, just don't care. If it starts to develop a limp, I'll just go out competitively and buy a new one. And so There are some things that we're thinking through in this regard. But right now, I would tell you that business model is a perverse incentive that we are going to lose in this fight. We are going to lose in this fight if we cannot flip this business model. I'm here to tell you that. I don't like it, but it is true. I would tell you anecdotally that China is still, after gains we've made in the last 5 years or so, about 5 to 6 times faster than us in acquisition. And in purchasing power parity, they spend about $1 to our $20 to get to the same capability. It's math, ladies and gentlemen. We are going to lose if we can't figure out how to drop the cost and increase the speed in our defense supply chains. It's a mathematical certainty. Now, in all of that, you did not hear me say drop the profitability. In fact, I actually want to raise the profitability. Why do I want to? I'm a contracting guy. I'm a pricer, for crying out loud. That's heresy. Well, the reason why I do is because of the barriers to entry. If it's very stupid profitable to be in defense, guess what's going to happen? There's going to be more people wanting to be in defense. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure that out in a free market economy, right? So I don't think it's a bad thing, but it does take us to rethink ourselves. Cost plus fixed fee. There's a statutory limit of 10%. But does that mean it's prohibited that you can put an award fee on top of that? I don't think so. So now, what would we do in that award fee? If we took the proxy statement of the company where the board of directors has told their C-suite, this is how your incentives will work: cash flow, revenue, quality. Not picking on any companies, but that's one company's proxy statement. Charlie knows who it is. And so if that's your proxy statement, how do we build an award fee plan that links everything that we want to everything you want? And then we just cheer each other on, for crying out loud. Man, I hope you're so successful that you never work again, because it means that we're going to get after China with this capability. Right now, our interests are this way aligned, almost completely opposite aligned. You can listen to quarterly results call after quarterly results call, and they'll say, we're doing great in this, great in that, and great in this. And I'm sitting there going, but you suck at our programs. I mean, how is that possible? Right? But they didn't give me a speaking part. Anyway, I think we can get there. And if you're interested in how, we can talk about it at the break or whatever. It gets a little bit involved. Okay, last one, free cash flow. This model has been used successfully in the marketplace forever, but the government doesn't do it. But what if we said, instead of the CEO giving the cash flow guidance, what if it were the 4 oversight committees of Congress that oversee the Defense Department? What if at the beginning of every Congress we gave them a class above threshold reprogramming request that said, we can incentivize our wing commanders and our PEOs, and then you guys will approve the right and left limits of that right now, but in execution, we don't get prior approval. We just rapidly reinvest. We are incentivized to save, not just spend all the money as rapidly as possible. Move as much money as you can into a separate account, not just for that execution year, but for the whole FIDA. And that money becomes free cash flow within the guidelines of Congress, and we update them quarterly, just like a CEO would update the Wall Street investors, right? And I guarantee you that's effective oversight. And so if we did that and we said to a wing commander, if you save money in category management and you put it in a separate account, even the last day of the fiscal year, boom, you get 50% of that back in any color of money you want it in. You could hire civ pay, if you need manning, if you want a better club, you need to fix the child development center, we never can get to that. Nobody can prioritize it above you. That's your incentive money. Same thing with program executive officers. They've got all kinds of problems. They need manning for pre-milestone B type programs. They have range instrumentation gaps where there's 50s technologies on our range and they can't get that color of money to facilitate the range and speed up their testing. If you said, hey, you can save money and immediately put it in free cash flow, you get 50% of that money immediately back. Nobody prioritizes it above you. You could fix every single other program in that portfolio with that money. You could say yes to an emerging technology at the table when somebody came up with a prototype from their IRAD investments in the execution year. And then we just remain accountable to Congress. The other 50% goes up to buy more B-21s, more F-35s, fix holes in 1,000 acquisition programs, and say yes to emerging technology, or stand up rare earth materials, or whatever it is that we need to stand up. All right, so that's my presentation, and I will turn it over to Mr. Williams. Thank you so much.
I'm going to reserve the right to ask a few more questions, even though I see zeros on the
Okay.
on the thing here. So great presentation, and I'm going to start with a threat question again.
All right.
And it relates to supply chain, right? So we understand the issues as we've watched during COVID, the problems in our supply chain. Is this a microcosm of what we should be worried about if we get into real conflict with China beyond where we are today?
I think it is, and like I mentioned about, I have great faith in our system, our free market system, and the incentives it produces. But when we understand the perverse incentives, it can lead us to other thoughts. When you have all these black swans happening like COVID, like the invasion of Ukraine and other things, what seemingly is a perfect supply chain with Toyota, Kanban, and the just-in-time inventories, and the balance sheet looks great because the inventory number is low and the plant and property equipment is low. But when the black swan comes along, the resilience is low too. If schedule matters as much as I think it does, now you've got a perverse incentive. But what if our pricers and our contracting officers and our industry partners looked at that problem and said, here are the 5 places in our supply chain that are not resilient. And we're going to put in the government's budget request together, a request that we're not asking you only to fund advanced procurement for long lead items, we're asking you to fund inventories. So what if you directly funded inventories at whatever level of supplier without any ads or pass-throughs, such that that business that's trying to run their balance sheet well, they don't have to keep those inventories on their balance sheet. Does not hurt them in business, but it does expand the resilience at those fragile places in the supply chain. It's a problem that industry is wrestling with, but if you have government as a partner, and we don't care about cash flows and all that, use the benefit of government and our understanding of business to go increase that resilience. And I think there's lots of opportunities like that.
So do you think the Department of Defense knows where it's fragile?
I don't think either the Department of Defense nor the primes know where their fragilities are. And I've seen some primes that are very sophisticated, make some of the best weapon systems in the world. But in their business side, they're still using, no kidding, spreadsheets and stubby pencils. And but there is a lot of technologies out there. I spent time with a company in San Jose just a couple of days ago that have gotten this to a level that's unbelievable, but they don't do defense work. And so I know it's possible. The problem is, for a prime, beyond compliance risk, DCMA saying you don't have an approved purchasing system or estimating system, where is the incentive for them to really control the costs and performance of their supply chain? Now, when I ask industry executives that, they'll say, General Holt, of course we care about that. But then I ask them the other question. So if I were going to incentivize it, that would be a waste of my time. If I told you that you could work with your supply chain and every $5 you save, I'll give you 3 back in profit. You're saying that you've wrung it out so well that kind of incentive wouldn't make any sense. I think we've got to think in terms of our free market motivations and turn it into the wind and really make it benefit us. And I think we can do that together.
So another threat question I think is relevant to your conversation. Now, how do we compete with a country that controls all companies that operate within their system, while the companies within our systems compete to maximize shareholder return?
Yeah, so it may surprise you to hear me say this, but when I analyze Chinese defense companies, and I do, I look at their profit margin and it's extraordinarily low. And I would tell you that is a weakness, not a strength. We have the greatest system known to mankind, but it is misaligned right now. I think we could actually use the profit motivation to drive innovation beyond the pace that they can keep up with. And I'll give you just one example where I hear this thinking inside the Pentagon and drives me nuts. Just one example. When you're in a command and control economy like the Chinese Communist Party, and by the way, I grew up as part of my childhood in Hong Kong, and so I understand this really, really well, and I understand the plight of the people of Hong Kong and what they're under. But I also understand that the people of mainland China are really delightful people, but they've been subjugated for so long they have no idea. But if you're in a command and control economy and you tell a middle school student, you scored well on the aptitude test, you're going to be doing STEM for the rest of your life. We're going to put you in a building with 70,000 people of your friends. You're going to do artificial intelligence. And I see us starting to try to follow that, where we're trying to say only the academy should turn out STEM students. We should have more STEM students. I'm like, no, stop. We should have STEM students that have wanted to be STEM since they were 3 years old. And we should put them next to an English major and a business expert and an artist and an economist with the same mission. That's how we win. That's how we win. We cannot outproduce them by a command and control just trying to do it better than they do it.
So I got a question that really follows up. How do we best accomplish your LOE1 to attract, retain the best talent? And the question goes on to say, as a nation, we're competing for the same talent, and the need is vast, but the pool is shallow.
Yeah. Well, some of it is very simple. It's you got to pay them more. When I got to this job,
I didn't hear any applause there. You got to pay them more, right?
Yeah. What's up with that?
What's wrong with that, right?
When I got to this job 4 years ago, I looked at how much are we paying Air Force contracting folks next to the rest of the federal government in paying their government contracting talent, and we were dead last. We were absolutely dead last. And I took that to the Vice Chief of Staff of the Air Force, and I showed him that chart, and I said, sir, this offends me. It's just the same thing as you saying, we don't have enough money to train up our pilots, and so you have to get your own private pilot's license and then just show up to the flight line. We're not treating the people the right way. So in the first year of mission-focused business leadership, we upgraded 1,200 positions on the civilian side out of 5,500 with the Air Force's help. I think we still got work to do there. I'm not trying to outbid everybody, but we can't be last with what we do and retain the talent. The other thing is you got to invest in their training. When the Air Force stopped training me, I was a PCO in the F-22 program. I was level 3 certified with an unlimited warrant. And I never got any more training to this day. And today I'm happy to tell you that we have 6 competency areas, and we are actively training against all 6 all the way up. So that Keenan Flagler School of Business partnership for all unlimited warrant holders that we're teaching them, that's after they show me they're a ninja in contracting. I'm asking the Air Force to start investing in them, not stop. And frankly, if you come out of a career being a business leader in the Air Force and you're $1 million a year person on the outside, why does that hurt me? I mean, you want to watch recruiting go crazy if that happens? It's okay. We just have to think about it as a marketplace of talent and then make sure that we're well positioned in it.
So I'm going to do one more question, and it's the one that got the most votes here. But you've answered it in some ways from your charts, but let me read it, and then I'm going to ask you for the number one. It says, what are the top 3 things that government and industry can do now to best prepare for the challenges ahead, 2026 and beyond? So this says the top 3. You've talked about a number of things. What's the number one? What is it, if we don't do X?
If we don't change our resourcing system, none of the rest of it matters. There's no amount.
By that you mean the PPBS?
I do. Not just the PPBS. I actually think that's second place. So the budgeting process could be the same budgeting process we have today, as glorious and as slow and stodgy as it is. If you just change the execution year flexibilities and modernize Congress's oversight of it to be more patient, which is saying a mouthful, because when their constituent calls and they try to make an argument about China, of we're supporting the PEO making the decision to take money away from your negotiation and give it to another one, that's the hard part to get over. But I think that gets back to the first problem I said. Do we really think that we're in an existential threat, yes or no? From Congress all the way down, do we really believe that? And if we do, we've got to get on a wartime footing, not a peacetime footing, in acquisition and in resourcing. And I think that's the number one obstacle to our success.
And with that, ladies and gentlemen, give a round of applause for Major General Cameron Holt.
I love you.
Stay right here. So Mr. Boykins joining me on stage.
Yeah.
We have a special presentation.
So, ladies and gentlemen, each year, the Government Contract Pricing Summit recognizes an individual or a member in our acquisition and pricing profession with the Excellence in Pricing Award. And this award celebrates the achievements, the high levels of achievement, the thought leadership that goes into pricing, and just the impacts that it has on, or that they have had on acquisition. And our award this year goes to Major General Cameron Holt. And so I would just like to say that this was inspiring. This really sets the stage, I think, for what we need to do together. And I think you have really laid it out just so plainly. We thank you for your thought leadership. We thank you for your mentorship. We thank you for your service to our country.
Thank you.
And this award is just a mere token of really what you mean. And I'm just trying not to get choked up here because, I love the uniform and I love what you have done.
Thank you, Al.
In this uniform. And it ain't over.
Yeah.
So we look forward to what's next with you. So, sir, congratulations to you.
I will tell you, I've known Al and Charlie now for many years. I know and I love them and I respect them. I will tell you that on July 15th, I'm going to hang up this uniform for the last time after 32 years of doing this. And I just want to say thank you to you. And I want to just pass on to all of the folks here. Please ignore those voices of division. Please ignore it. We've got to come together as a nation, as an American people together. And these two servants that are standing on the stage with me, they're giving me this award, but they're worthy of all of the awards in the world themselves. And so what I would tell you is that as I hang up this uniform after 32 years of serving with my community in Air Force contracting and pricing, I accept this award, but I only accept it on behalf of the airmen and the guardians that I lead, because it's really them who do that work every day. So thank you.
All right. God bless you, sir. Go ahead, Charlie. You want to close it out?
All right, guys. Thank you. That was the last plenary session for today. There's some breakouts. I think there's another think tank later, but enjoy your afternoon.